Badger appears to be a 6 foot tall Asian male with short dark hair, black t-shirt, armed with a knife right now.
It appears he has 2 knives now.
He's still inside the bus.
Copy that. Door open or closed?
Door's closed and Badger is armed with a knife and a pair of scissors, and he's defiling the body at the front of the bus as we speak.
On July 30th, 2008, Tim McLean was on his way back from Edmonton, Canada after he was working at a carnival in Alberta. He was 22 years old and had worked as a carnival barker. His job was to attract customers, and they're the ones that invite you to play a game at a fair or a carnival. Their job is to get your attention and make you spend money.
So, I'm on the Greyhound bus.
The Greyhound bus that Tim was on left the station around 12:30 in the morning, and around 6:55, some sources say 5:55, his bus left Erickson, Manitoba, and it's where passenger Vince Lee got on. Vince Lee purchased his ticket under a fake name, Wong Pent. Some passengers say that Lee seemed agitated and possibly confused as he stepped onto the bus and chose a seat near the front. Soon, life for everyone on Greyhound Bus 1170 would never ever be the same. After a few hours, the bus stopped for a break, so Vince Lee got back on the bus after a smoke break. He started to look at each passenger as he walked down the aisle. He then sat beside Tim, even though the seat behind him was empty. Tim looked up for a moment to acknowledge him, and then he went back to sleep with his headphones on. He was sitting at the window seat, and this image shows where they were sitting. It's not a picture of them, it's just an example. But after a few minutes, Lee started to chant in a deep and low voice. It was a little past 8 p.m. About 20 minutes later, the screams started. The screams quickly drowned out the movie that was playing, and when the passengers looked in the direction of the screams, they saw Vince Lee with a large hunting knife in his hand. Without any warning, Lee started to stab Tim, and passengers then saw the blade disappear into Tim's neck. Tim's horrific screams stayed with a lot of the passengers, but soon things would get even worse. Stephen Allison was a passenger, and he yelled for the driver to stop and pull over. The bus driver, his name was Bruce Martin, and he begged Vince Lee to stop, but he wouldn't. So the driver then called 911, and this was around 8:30, and police arrived about 10 minutes later. Tim had defensive wounds, which proved that he did struggle and he tried to escape, but because of where he was sitting in the back of the bus and beside a window, so he was trapped. And then he either fell or was thrown to the floor. Vince just continued to calmly and methodically stab Tim over and over. And because he was so preoccupied, he didn't notice that the other passengers were leaving the bus. But Vince Lee's expression never changed. He was robotic, and he stabbed Tim around 50 or 60 times, according to witnesses. Now, during the standoff with police, officers heard Lee say that he had to stay on the bus forever. And he also attempted to drive the bus and get away, but thankfully, a Greyhound driver named Bernie pulled over to help, and he disabled the bus. He had been driving for more than 35 years, and when he saw the bus pull over, he pulled his bus in front. So he stepped on the bus and called out to Vince Lee at the back. Vince stopped stabbing Tim's neck long enough to look up and say, "Get emergency." And that's when he realized what Vince Lee was doing. Around that same time, he said that a gruff-voiced man seemed to just materialize out of nowhere. It was truck driver Chris Algieri. He was hauling a load of steel pipe when he saw the two buses pull to the side of the road, so he stopped on the shoulder. He heard a passenger yell that someone was being stabbed, so he grabbed a steel snipe and stood outside the bus doors. And he said that he was ready to break every bone in Lee's body. And this is when he saw Vince Lee removing Tim's head.
Me and a trucker that had stopped and the Greyhound driver ran up to the door to maybe see if the guy was still alive or we could help or something like that. And when we all got up, we seen that the guy was cutting off the guy's head there. And then he saw us. He came back to the front of the bus, told the driver to shut the door. He pressed the button and the door shut, but it didn't shut in time, and the guy was able to get his knife out and take a swipe at us, so we backed off the door.
They continued to guard the door with a crowbar and hammers, and all they could do was watch as Lee mutilated Tim's body. He then stood up holding a blood-dripping knife in one hand and Tim's head in his other hand. And passengers were standing outside on the side of the road, and they were screaming and vomiting, and kids were crying, and teens were just recording everything on their phone. And Lee then opened Tim's chest, and he removed his heart, his lungs, his liver, and then he ripped out his intestine. In front of the passengers, he ate Tim's eyes and part of his heart. He cut off Tim's nose and both of his ears. He smelled them and he licked the blood from his fingers. He continued to dissect Tim's body for 4 hours while passengers remained outside the bus. By 9 o'clock that night, he was pacing up and down the aisle until special negotiators and heavily armed tactical units arrived. And around 1:20 that morning, he broke open a window on the bus. He threw out some of his personal belongings, along with a knife and a pair of scissors. He then jumped out of the bus head first, and he landed on top of the knife. He was screaming and struggling with police, and he had to be tasered and handcuffed. When they searched him, they found Tim's ear, his nose, and part of his mouth in a plastic bag. Other parts of Tim's remains were placed in plastic bags for evidence and removed from the bus. Tim's body showed evidence of damage in over 100 areas, and they ranged from abrasions to a large gaping wound in his chest. His internal organs were recovered in plastic bags in 4 separate places on the bus. The pathologist estimated that 1/3 of Tim's heart was never recovered, but Lee denied eating any parts of Tim. While preparing for this trip, Vince Lee left his ex-wife Anna a note that said that he was gone, not to look for him, and that he wished she was happy. She reported that in the summer of 2008, Vince was acting weird for several days, and he didn't sleep or eat regularly, and he cried a lot. He told her that he saw God. She thought he was just tired, so she brought him some sleeping pills, and the symptoms went away in about 7 days. In July of 2008, he experienced auditory hallucinations, and God told him to move from Edmonton to Winnipeg. While he was in Erickson, Manitoba, he left the bus and followed what his auditory hallucinations were saying. They told him to dispose of some of his personal possessions, which he did by either selling or burning them. It was 5:55 when he got off the bus in Erickson, even though the driver told him that it wasn't his stop. But there wasn't enough time to reissue his ticket, so he spent 24 hours in Erickson. He was seen sitting at the bus stop long before his ride was scheduled to arrive. He posted a sign that read, "Laptop for sale, $600 or better offer," in front of his luggage, and he just sat there. He sat there the entire night with his eyes wide open. Just hours before he would board the bus with Tim McLean, he sold his laptop to a 15-year-old boy for $60. Once Lee's gruesome actions became public, the computer was confiscated. The teen said that Lee looked perfectly put together. He looked like a businessman. And he told police once he brought the computer home, he realized he needed the password, so he went back to the bench where Lee was sitting to get it. On the laptop, he found personal letters and photos, as well as a note about his feelings of guilt because he left China and that things in Canada were not as he expected they would be. Around 9 o'clock, he walked into a store where he hung around for what seemed like ages, making Darren, the man that worked there, extremely uncomfortable. There was something about him that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. So he called his husband David, and he then rushed from a meeting to get to their store, but Lee was gone by then. That night, neither of them could sleep because they kept thinking about the mysterious man. And David got out of the bed around 3 a.m. and he went down to check on his store. Vince was sitting across the street, and that's where he saw Vince sitting on the bench with his eyes wide open. As far as why Vince Lee did this, what was his motive? He said that he had been having thoughts about aliens and that he had been chosen by God to conquer them. According to the voices in his head, he was doing everyone a service by killing Tim. He said God told him to kill Tim or that he would die immediately. He said he was an evil son of an evil God and that God chose him as the killer and chose Tim as the victim. He believed that Tim was a threat to his life before and even after his death. I guess he thought that Tim could wake up like a zombie. He was actually suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia and he was having a psychosis-induced episode. A little bit about Vince Lee. He was born and raised in China. He earned a degree in computer science, then he immigrated to Canada in 2001. He became a citizen in 2005. There were times when he was unemployed and there were also times that he was holding down 2 jobs at once. In 2006, he and his wife Anna were divorced. And before he became a citizen, he was institutionalized after police officers saw him walking on the highway, quote unquote, following the sun. And that's something that he claimed God told him to do. In court, when a judge asked Vince Lee if he wanted a lawyer, he just shook his head and he quietly said, "Please kill me." He said, "I try to forget it. I feel nervous. I feel painful. I am embarrassed. It was wrong." He also said he was sorry for what he did and what it's done to Tim's family. He said he would do anything for their family and that he would ask for forgiveness, but he knew it would be hard for Tim's family to accept. He understands that people are afraid of him, and he said that he takes his medication every day, he's glad to take it, and that he doesn't hear voices anymore. On March 5th, 2009, 7 months after the crime, Vince Lee was found not criminally responsible due to his schizophrenia. He was then sent to a secure treatment facility. Vince wasn't in a normal functioning state of mind when he killed Tim, so he could not be found guilty. He was suffering from one of the most dangerous symptoms of schizophrenia, which is psychosis. It causes the person to lose contact with reality, and they may experience visual or auditory hallucinations and delusions that they believe are true. Personally, I don't know if he knew what he was doing, but he did remember it. He described the murder in complete detail to his forensic psychiatric team. He prepared for the day by buying the knife and the plastic bags in advance. He got on that bus prepared to kill, and his name was eventually changed to Will Baker with the help of his psych team. And he's been living on his own in a Winnipeg apartment since November 2016. On February the 10th in 2017, he was declared completely stable and he was able to function completely on his own. That includes regulating his own medication. There were 34 passengers on board, including children. Many of the passengers suffered from recurring nightmares and severe anxiety and depression. Some were unable to eat or sleep. One passenger said he was haunted when he tried to fall asleep. He would close his eyes and he would see Vince Lee in the window, looking like a madman. The first officer on the bus never recovered from his shock. Of course, as a police officer, he had seen some gruesome things, but he just couldn't get these particular images out of his head. He took his life 6 years after the murder. I cannot imagine what these people went through. Some of the passengers turned to alcohol, some can no longer trust. Others lost their jobs, and some committed crime. Some can't look at or even use sharp knives when they're cooking, and others are paralyzed by crowds. One mother even had her child taken away because of extreme PTSD and depression because she put off getting the help that she needed. Her mother now has custody and she gets to visit her daughter there. Greyhound offered to reimburse a passenger for a jacket that was splattered with blood. She didn't want it because she said that it would just be a reminder. Their representatives also assured some of them that they would receive compensation and trauma counseling. But shortly after, those email addresses and phone numbers that Greyhound provided just stopped working. They paid one couple $437 to reimburse them for clothing, trading cards, a pillow, and a pair of sunglasses. The items were so stained with blood that they couldn't give it back to them. And Greyhound Canada shut down permanently in 2021. Tim's parents never got to say goodbye because his body was completely unviewable.
I do have to say the hardest thing that I have ever had to do was to try and explain to my husband that he can't say goodbye, that there wasn't anything for him to hold on to. There wasn't a hand to hold on to. There wasn't a face to look at. And all he wanted to do was say goodbye to his son. And I had talked to the medical examiner who I had known previous and asked her straight out, is there any way that he could hold a hand, see his face, touch a foot? And my answer was no. And I knew that there wasn't much of Timothy for him to hold on to. So, did we get to say goodbye? No.
He had a son on the way. Their grandson gave Tim's mother a reason to keep going. And they said that no one will ever be held responsible for their pain.